Vanguard has had a new restriction list put into place, and of course, it is actually one that I think has a lot bigger implications than usual, because they've not only gone and unrestricted some stuff and restricted some stuff as usual, but I think this ban list was by far one of the most violent ones that we've had in a while, especially for the standard format, because in my opinion, they hit some cards that I would not have expected them to hit, and they went an extra step beyond to restrict stuff that I feel like is a bit atypical for Bouchard restriction lists. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, and also of course go over the PDF that they always post that explains the restrictions and give my thoughts on it too. So for those of you that have missed it entirely, that have been overwhelmed by the Shadowverse Evolve and Vanguard information, as well as everything else that was announced, there was a new ban list announced, the new fighters rule change, and basically for the restrictions themselves, they choice restricted Shiranui Oboro with the Drag Veda overtrigger specifically. And they do give a reasoning behind this, but it's basically because of how many attacks you can do, which is basically 10 attacks in one turn if you do flip the OT during one of the Shiranui stride turns. But the other thing is that you also have a restriction between Luard and Selgaon. So both of these are, in my opinion, what I call violent restrictions, because choosing to restrict with the overtrigger is finally showing cracks at them admitting a fault in game design, that maybe the overtrigger was not exactly the best idea, because we've only had restrictions of the overtrigger in premium until now with Ultima and all OTs, but now we're actually seeing one in standard, and some are arguing it's like, oh, it's not that the overtrigger is bad, it's that Drag Veda as a card is bad, because you can still use other overtriggers, right? So of course you can still use Valnot and Eidos Pharaoh and like all that kind of stuff too, but it also makes the product illegal, and some people would argue, well, the Shiranui product was always illegal because it doesn't include an energy generator, and it's like, yes, that's true, but that is a smaller purchase you needed to make, because just buying the starter deck for a energy generator is one thing. The quick start decks don't include overtriggers, so you have to also now procure a overtrigger from somewhere too to make your Shiranui deck playable. So it's a very strong restriction. I would not have expected this. I would have rather expected like a Shenri choice restriction or something like that if we're restricting Selgaon. But this one makes me surprised too, because Selgaon is a very recent promo. This came out in December in English, just a month after the Luard and Shiranui Stride deck sets came out, and it was part of the Vanguard manga. Now, Selgaon is a very vanilla card, not vanilla, sorry, very generic card for Keter, because it allows you to, after it boosts, retire itself to look at top 2 and add 1 card to hand, put the rest at bottom, and it gains plus 5k when it boosts as long as you played an order this turn or you have more rears than your opponent. So this card will come out in English eventually for sure, because it's very, very strong in Rezael specifically, and basically every single Keter deck. Like, if you're planning to play Keter, you must own 4 of these. I personally own 8 because I was using them in Rezael and Luard, and I'll just take out the Luard copies and put them into the new faded one that Hikari uses, right? But it was surprising because this is a very new card. It's a very new card. It's a promo. People bought 4 copies of a manga just to own it, and while yes, you can transfer it to other decks, people that only bought it for Luard are, definitely, I guess they're done with their sales quota for the manga, so it doesn't affect them as much, but I'm just very surprised that's such a recent card, right? It basically shows that Bouchard is willing to hit cards that are just out. Like, they are willing to hit cards that recently released, as long as the deck is showing to be a bit of a problem. I do think these hits are healthy for the game, don't get me wrong, but I do think that from a restriction list design philosophy, there is a bit of caution to be held. I think there's a little bit of a worry here where it's like, okay, if we print really strong support for a deck next set, we can just hit it, because, I mean, maybe if it's not part of a set, you don't hit it, but these are still recently released Stride deck sets that you can still find and buy in some places. So I don't know. It's also like this just came out for English too, so you also have to think about those sales as well. So it's a bit interesting for me that they chose to go this violent with the hits. Like, I saw Luard being restricted maybe with like Painkiller, which is pretty old, but that would affect English too much, I guess, or like maybe with the Witch that prevents 5th or more attack, something like that, to just like take away one of the strengths of the deck, but not one of the most powerful engines of the deck. And of course the OT restriction is also very huge, and that's not it for Shiranui yet either. We still have another page for Shiranui, but also choosing to unrestrict Willista makes sense because of course the draw power the deck has, was basically just a bit too much for its time, so they kind of like put a pause on that and now they resumed it. but Gandiva they still see as too violent to be allowed to play with the new friends from Divines. But then if you have playtested or seen anyone playtest Blagmire, you probably already know that the things that Blagmire does sometimes feel just kind of like it's fine when compared to what Gandiva did. But this is only one page of those, and these all go into effect in Japan on the 1st of April. There's actually a WGP the day, 2 days before this, so there's going to be one more event. Just the first event of the WGP season actually will still have both Lord and Shiranui at full power, but these will go into effect on April 1st in Japanese. We don't know yet when they're going to go into effect in English, but they also put a second page, which is now that every single deck that has a G zone has to play the ride line that it comes with. So initially this was just restricted that you were forced to play the 0, 1, and 3. So this was to prevent like diversity cut stuff that people used to do with Chrono Jet. But now the entire ride line has to be the one that comes in the sealed product. And people were not very happy about this because they were like running product Messiah and stuff like that, and like experimenting with different cards, you know, playing Maple for the grade 2 slot in Luard, for example, and things like that. But now you are forced to play this, and of course the biggest hit is for Shiranui, because Shiranui played the Shoujo Doji grade 2 ride line, which allowed you to play a lot of strong stealth card like Izasao, as well as of course Shenri. I do think Shenri will still be played in Shiranui just because of how good the card is, but I do think that this is a, like, this probably should have been there from the start. I don't know why it took them so long to, like, you know, because initially it was like, you can use whatever, and then it was like, okay, 0, 1, and 3, and now it's 2. It's like, this could have been prevented if you just restricted the ride lines to always be what the ride line is from the very beginning, or from when you set the grade 3s as the restricted ones. So I don't know. I do think it's a bit strange how they did it this time around, but there is a whole PDF explaining the hits too. So of course you can find this PDF on the official Vanguard website, the Japanese one. So they basically they looked at the Vanguard worlds, the Japanese version of the worlds, to choose the hits. And of course if you looked at the worlds, it was all Luard and Shiranui with like a little bit of Maigo, a little bit of Morphonica, because Morphonica of course is very strong into the Shiranui matchup. So they had Rejeweled and Youthberg on the watch list, but they felt that there wasn't exactly anything too out of the ordinary with them, and their usage rate didn't really go up, so no hits for them. Maigo also has been used just about the same, so there's no reason to hit them either. But then for Luard, for example, this wasn't, you know, they didn't restrict it, or it wasn't even out yet for the last restriction list, but there's been a lot of tops for this deck, especially at Worlds, so they chose to restrict it. And for Shiranui as well, basically the same thing goes, but most importantly, the ride line has been restricted as well because of the way that it can be used. So basically the restrictions is the ones we explained. So Lord and Selgaon, basically they say that the reason why is that, you know, you could put 4 of these cards into, you know, I mean, like, what is this explanation? So they're basically saying that if you use Selgaon, you can continue to draw cards non-stop, it contributes to your ritual count, and you can keep calling Selgaon with Luard every single turn as well, and keep putting it back to the deck every single turn too. So therefore it's a very strong card, especially in this deck, and therefore, you know, it basically means that your deck never runs out either, because you're constantly like, you have like basically 3 reasons that they listed as reasons why this card deserves to be restricted. So basically constant drawing, constant deck thinning, and of course the ability to you know, increase your hand as well as your board because of what Selgaon does, right? So the dog unfortunately is gonna have to get a new owner, and for now that new owner will be, you know, Luard can no longer take walks with Selgaon. He loses his dog, he has to stay to his birds. But at least Rezael can take Selgaon for walks going forward. Then Shiranui, of course, there's pretty... So Shoujo Doji's ride line allowed you to abuse stealth units. Wow, what a surprise. And so they decided to restrict that. Furthermore, because of the ability to do drive checks during your Vanguard, but also your opponent's Vanguard's attacks, when you would pop Drag Veda, you'd be able to do... you use like Sekie and Furai to attack 3 times, and so you'd be able to do up to 10 attacks to the opponent's Vanguard in total. And so this they felt is a problem, and also decided to restrict it. Now you could argue that, you know, other Dragon Empire decks can also abuse the you know, the Drag Veda OT. Like, I mean, technically Nirvana still doesn't do that many, right? Because you'd be able to do like Esperal Vanguard check OT, Esperal, Vanguard, Esperal, right? So that would be 8 attacks. So I guess 10 is where they draw the line. It's interesting, but it's this is what they decided to do. And then just talking about the Williston restriction, basically they just felt that, you know, this card has not been performing much. It hasn't been topping, so therefore they unrestricted it. They didn't see anything for premium or standard, or I mean V premium and V premium. Therefore no restrictions. I mean, there's no events, so what do you plan to even do? But the next restriction will be in June, so we can look forward to that. But honestly, I would like to hear your thoughts about these restrictions too, because I do think that it makes it a bit... Oh yeah, true, Esperal is once per turn, huh? So yeah, never mind. That's only possible in Shiranui because of the Shiranui restanders, huh? That's pretty interesting. But yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts about this restriction, because for me, it does set an interesting precedent just because of, I don't know, it's very aggressive restrictions. So it's kind of like, if I'm playing a top tier deck right now, like, you know, let's say one of the glitter decks becomes a tier 1 now, thanks to the new glitter promos. Does that mean that once the promo distribution period is out, there's a chance it gets restricted in June? Like, I don't feel too happy about that. It feels a bit weird. I personally think that when a deck is a really big problem, it does deserve to be hit. But I think Shiranui was indeed a problem, but they finally started printing cards that answer Shiranui, like Ladder. They started making decks that have really good matchups into Shiranui, like Varga. And so I kind of thought that maybe you don't need to hit this as hard, like just take away the ride line. I honestly think for Shiranui, they could have just taken away the ride line. Again, if you think I'm biased, by the way, I do own all of these decks. I own every single deck in Vanguard for the most part, but I don't play them. I literally have sleeved up both these decks and I've never played them myself. I always give them to my friends to play because they just need a deck for a tournament. So in case you're doubting my bias or anything like that, there's no such thing. But I do think it's a bit weird how aggressively they were hit. I think Luard, I do agree that there was no better cards. If you really wanted to power down Luard and bring it more in line with everything else, hitting Selgawan does answer the issue. But I do hope that they're a bit more careful, because at the end of the day, announcing restrictions at these big conferences, it's not a celebratory thing, it's a shameful thing in my opinion. It's like it goes to show that there's a defect in the product, that there is a, you know, like there's a mistake in the card game design, and that's why, you know, Shadowverse Evolve has very little restrictions, because they are very careful with card game design, and they've been able to really carefully craft, you know, these games too. So that's why for me it's a little bit strange that they went so ham on the restrictions this time, and I hope card design itself just kind of like stays at a good level. I do think standard format is quite balanced despite these restrictions. You know, it's very much still a lot of different decks are topping, and especially the Divine Set 1 format too. But I guess they just want to put everything in line with for the new players to not get completely blown out by not knowing how to counterplay Shiranui, I guess. So I don't know. There's a lot more. I wish I could have heard more reasoning why they chose to hit these specific cards this aggressively, because it's, you know, is it really just the 10 attacks with Dragveda? Is it really just the 3 points for Selgao and for Luard? It feels like there's a bit more to it as well. And yes, for Shadowverse Evolve restrictions, there was one more restrictions after Shenlong and Uma Musume, and that is a restriction in Runecraft for Kuon for one of the golds in set 6. So I do think that, I don't know, I hope that, I'm just a little bit worried because Blindmire definitely reads like something that might get hit in the future, and I just kind of wish that design, like, they would just be a tiny bit more careful with the design here and there. I don't know, I'm very conflicted in myself on that point, because I love Blindmire's design because it's risky and explosive, but there are a couple things where I'm like, the card itself is really cool, but some of the support cards feel like they're a little bit pushed. So that's why I just feel like, just be a little bit more careful, dear R&D team. But that's all I wanted to talk about for the ban list. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and of course Chad has been here with us on Twitch as well, talking about everything, so we can also go into more detailed discussions on my Twitch if you want to join in on discussion and follow me there too. If you like the video, give it a like. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. But otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.